The muddy banks of the Padma River became a scene of tragedy. 13-year-old Swarna Das, her laughter silenced forever. She was just one of many who risked their lives crossing the porous Bangladesh-India border. But Swarna's story ignited a firestorm. Her death, a flashpoint in a long, simmering conflict. Now, two nations point fingers, each accusing the other. And at the heart of it all, a grieving family mourns a future stolen. Swarna's death is not an isolated incident. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of the complex geopolitical dynamics at play. The Bangladesh-India border, a place where hope collides with danger, where desperation pushes people into the hands of fate, and where the promise of a better life can vanish with a single gunshot. Bangladesh erupted in anger. The news of Swarna's death spread like wildfire. People took to the streets demanding justice. The official narrative was clear. The Indian Border Security Force, BSF, was responsible. They accused the BSF of unprovoked firing, of brutality, of acting with impunity. India, however, offered a different version of events. They claimed Swarna was caught in the crossfire between the BSF and smugglers. Some Indian media outlets even suggested she was fleeing internal conflict in Bangladesh. The blame, they insisted, lay with the Bangladesh Border Guard, BGB, for failing to control their side of the border. The truth, shrouded in a fog of accusations and counter-accusations. Both sides weaponized the tragedy, using it to bolster their own narratives. The international community watched on, caught in the crosshairs of a war of words. The newly elected government in Dhaka wasted no time. Prime Minister Muhammad Yunus, still finding his footing, took a strong stance. He lodged a formal protest with India, demanding a full and transparent investigation. This was not just about Swarna, he declared, but about all the lives lost on the border. Yunus's condemnation of the BSF resonated with the Bangladeshi people. They had grown tired of the killings, the disappearances, the fear that clung to the border region. The government's strong response reflected a growing national sentiment. Enough was enough. The international community too began to take notice. Human rights organizations amplified the calls for justice. The pressure mounted on India to address the situation, to hold those responsible accountable. To understand the tragedy of Swarna Das, one must look beyond the headlines. The Bangladesh-India border is more than just a line on a map. It's a scar, etched by history, that continues to divide. The 1971 War of Independence that birthed Bangladesh left behind a legacy of mistrust. Issues like illegal migration, smuggling, and disputes over water resources continue to plague the relationship. The border itself, a tangled web of rivers and rice paddies, is notoriously porous. This complex geopolitical landscape creates a breeding ground for tension. Both countries view the border through the lens of security, often resorting to heavy-handed tactics. It's in this volatile environment that innocent lives like Swarna's are caught in the crossfire. Section 5. Beyond Swarna. A pattern of violence plagues the border region. Swarna's death, while tragic, is not an isolated incident. It's a single thread in a much larger tapestry of violence that has plagued the Bangladesh-India border for decades. Human rights groups have documented countless cases of killings, torture, and disappearances. The victims, often poor and marginalized, are caught in a web of poverty, desperation, and exploitation. They cross the border in search of work, a better life, or simply to escape the harsh realities of their existence. But for many, the journey ends in tragedy. The stories are as heartbreaking as they are numerous. Farmers shot while tending their fields, women and children caught in the crossfire, young men disappearing without a trace, their families left with nothing but unanswered questions. Section 6. The human cost. Voices from the border speak of loss and fear. The true cost of the border violence can't be measured in statistics alone. It's etched on the faces of those who live in its shadow. Their stories, a testament to the human toll of this enduring conflict. We live in fear, says Amina Begum, a farmer who lives near the border. Every day we hear gunshots. We don't know when our loved ones will leave and never come back. Her words echo the sentiments of many. The fear is palpable, a constant hum in the background of their lives. It affects everything they do, from how they earn their living to how they raise their children. The trauma of loss is another burden they carry. Families torn apart, their grief compounded by the lack of justice. For them, the border is not just a physical barrier, but a constant reminder of their pain and loss. Section 7. Human rights organizations. Sound the alarm. Calls for accountability grow louder. Human rights organizations have long sounded the alarm about the violence on the Bangladesh-India border. They've documented cases, published reports, and lobbied governments to take action. But their pleas have often fallen on deaf ears. Organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Odhikar have been instrumental in bringing the issue to the forefront. They've highlighted the culture of impunity that exists within the border security forces, the lack of transparency and accountability, and the urgent need for independent investigations. Their work is crucial, not just for holding perpetrators accountable, but also for giving a voice to the victims. By shining a light on the human cost of the violence, they hope to galvanize international pressure and bring about meaningful change. The Indian Border Security Force, or BSF, has come under intense scrutiny for its role in the border violence. Accusations of excessive force, extrajudicial killings, and a lack of accountability have dogged the force for years. The BSF argues that it's operating in a challenging environment, tasked with protecting India's borders from a multitude of threats. They point to the prevalence of smuggling, trafficking, and cross-border infiltration as justification for their actions. However, critics argue that the BSF's tactics are often disproportionate and counterproductive. They point to the high number of civilian casualties, the lack of transparency in investigations, and the rare instances of BSF personnel being held accountable for their actions. The lack of accountability, they argue, fosters a culture of impunity within the BSF, emboldening them to act with little regard for human life. This, in turn, perpetuates the cycle of violence and mistrust that has come to define the border region. India finds itself walking a tightrope. On one hand, it faces pressure from Bangladesh and the international community to address the border violence and hold its security forces accountable. On the other hand, it's grappling with legitimate security concerns along its porous border with Bangladesh. India's response has been a mix of defensiveness and cautious engagement. It has defended the BSF's actions, arguing that they are necessary to protect its borders. However, it has also acknowledged the need for restraint and has engaged in dialogue with Bangladesh to address the issue. India has taken some steps to address the concerns, such as issuing stricter guidelines for the use of force by the BSF. India has also increased border patrols. However, critics argue that these measures are insufficient and that more needs to be done to address the root causes of the violence and hold perpetrators accountable. The cycle of violence on the Bangladesh-India border will not end without dialogue. Both countries must recognize their shared responsibility in addressing the issue and work together to find a lasting solution. This dialogue must go beyond the usual rhetoric and address the root causes of the problem. Issues like poverty, lack of opportunity, and the porous nature of the border must be addressed in a comprehensive and collaborative manner. Confidence-building measures, such as joint border patrols, intelligence sharing, and coordinated efforts to combat smuggling and trafficking, can help to reduce tensions and foster trust. At the same time, mechanisms for accountability and redress must be strengthened to ensure that justice is served and that victims are not forgotten. The dream of a peaceful and secure border may seem distant, but it's not unattainable. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset, from one of confrontation to one of cooperation. It requires both countries to recognize their shared humanity and to prioritize the well-being of all people living along the border. Investing in education, healthcare, and economic opportunities in the border region is crucial to addressing the poverty and lack of opportunity that drive people to risk their lives crossing the border. Promoting cross-border trade and cultural exchanges can help to build bridges of understanding and foster a sense of shared destiny. The tragic death of Swarna Das serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of inaction. It's a call to action for both countries to move beyond the blame game and work together to create a safer and more secure future for all. Only then can the border truly become a bridge, not a barrier,